My name is Marco Garza, and I am originally from Veracruz. I have been a truck driver since I was very young, and to this day, it's still my profession. I'm currently 53 years old, which means I've dedicated my entire life to this job. For a large part of my career, my father-in-law accompanied me on the road. He also worked as a truck driver, and often told me how much he missed being on the highways in his truck. So whenever I had a delivery trip, I would invite him, and he gladly accepted. This made the long journey easier for me, as I had someone to talk to. For many years we traveled together across the Mexican highways, sharing both good and bad experiences. But one day, my father-in-law passed away due to illness, which was incredibly painful for both my wife and me, as I considered him like a second father. When it happened, I took a few weeks off to be with my wife and kids, but I had to return to work because we needed the money. I still remember the first night I drove after his passing. It felt so strange driving without him by my side, someone I had always talked to during those long drives. But something unexpected started happening. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, still affected by the recent loss. But I began to feel like someone was with me, like there was a presence in the truck. It was hard to explain, but it felt as if I wasn't truly alone. I thought it was just my imagination, but I had never experienced anything like that before. Around 1 a.m., I stopped at a rest area that I usually stopped at when taking that route. It was always full of friendly colleagues, a safe place to rest. That night I really felt the need to take a break, so I parked without hesitation. The first thing I did was head to the bathroom, as I really needed to go. I quickly greeted some friends I knew, then went straight inside. When I came out, I saw a colleague, someone I hadn't seen in a long time, entering the area. As soon as he saw me, he came directly toward me to greet me with a hug. I was happy to see him again and smiled widely, but my smile quickly faded when he said, "I knew you were here. I saw your father-in-law in your truck, so I came in to greet you. But I'm in a hurry and need to leave." I was stunned and asked, trembling, "My father-in-law? How could that be?" He responded quickly, "Yes, I saw him in the passenger seat, and since I knew him well, I greeted him with a big smile, just like always. But I'm in a rush, so I need to go." I was speechless, and in disbelief I told him what had happened to my father-in-law. It seemed impossible, but he just stared at me and nervously laughed, asking if I was joking. I assured him it was not a joke, and explained that I had just returned to work after spending several weeks with my wife. He then hugged me and apologized, but insisted that what he had seen was real, that my father-in-law was indeed sitting in my truck, and he greeted him with that same familiar smile. I believed him because there was no reason for him to lie. We said our goodbyes, but my plans to rest were gone. How could I sleep in the cabin knowing my father-in-law was there? I bought a coffee and decided to continue my journey, but now I knew that what I had been feeling, that sensation of not being alone, was real. Even though I loved my father-in-law deeply, it wasn't comforting to know he was still there. It scared me, giving me chills. However, hours later, something happened that would change my entire perspective on this. Something very powerful occurred, something I'm about to share with you that is 100% true, and I am still in disbelief. Around 4 a.m., I was still driving, exhausted, and with only 2 hours left to reach my destination. I had finished my coffee, and not even blasting the music helped with my drowsiness. At one point I felt myself starting to doze off, but then something, or someone, shook me so violently that it woke me up just before I was about to crash head-on into a bus, which saved my life. It really happened. I felt someone grab me by the shoulders, shaking me so forcefully that I woke up in time to swerve and avoid the bus. When I looked around afterward, I was so shaken that I genuinely thought someone had been in the truck with me. It felt so real. I immediately called my wife to tell her about what had just happened. Naturally, she was terrified and asked if I was okay. I reassured her and told her I was fine, but that I was sure it had been her father who had saved my life. She started crying with me, and we stayed on the phone until I finally reached my destination. Afterward, I took a long nap to recharge for the trip home. On the way back, I still felt the same presence with me, and the sensation lingered. But when I arrived home, my wife said something that resonated with me. She told me that although she loved her father dearly, he needed to rest in peace. She said he deserved to find his way to peace, so we called a priest to say prayers and bless the truck, so my father-in-law could move on. After that, I never again felt the presence of someone with me during my trips, and nothing paranormal happened again. As unbelievable as this story may sound, it really happened. Although I no longer fear these experiences, I understand that they may give chills to others, but I choose to focus on what my father-in-law did for me, even after he passed. I want to share something that happened to me on December 30th, 2023. It might not be a typical horror story, but it was a very mysterious and unexplainable event, and especially what happened afterward, which left me terrified. Please keep this anonymous because it genuinely scared me, and I don't want others to go through the same thing. I am a truck driver, and on that night, I was traveling from Sacramento, California to Denver, Colorado. It was my final trip before the new year, as I had been on the road for 3 weeks and was planning to spend New Year's Eve with my family. That's how I work with the company, 3 weeks on the road and 1 week off to be with family. Anyway, my plan was to reach Salt Lake City to rest, then head out early to Denver to make the delivery, and finally return to my home in Greeley, Colorado. I was driving along Interstate 80, crossing California and Nevada. Everything was normal. But when I entered the state of Utah around 11 p.m., I saw 3 lights in the sky, similar to what many people describe seeing online. I stopped and recorded it with my phone, then sent the video to my wife, who started joking, saying it was aliens. What's strange is that when I stopped to record, it was just me and one other car on the opposite side of the highway, which also stopped when they saw the lights. I tried to take some pictures, but I didn't have time. Those lights lasted about 40 seconds, and that's how long the video lasted. Watching it was really impressive to me, and I thought it would just be an interesting story to tell later. However, what happened afterward is what's been haunting me since. I reached Salt Lake City, where I slept for 7 hours, and then continued on my way to Denver. I didn't want to arrive too late since my family was expecting me. I finally reached Denver around 4 p.m., where I only needed to unhook the trailer and head home. After 5 p.m., I arrived at home, and my family was waiting for me with dinner and celebrations. I spent a couple of hours enjoying time with them, but around 8:30 p.m., while we were having dinner, the doorbell rang. My 18-year-old daughter went to answer, then came back saying that some men in formal suits were asking for me. I went to the door and found 2 men standing there who didn't even introduce themselves. They immediately said they needed me to come with them to their vehicle, as they had something serious to discuss with me. They insisted that I bring my phone, claiming it was very important. I was completely confused and scared. I had no idea who these people were, but their serious demeanor frightened me. They didn't look friendly at all. They were grim and intimidating. They led me to a black SUV where another man, who seemed to be in charge, was waiting. He had the same cold, detached attitude and said to me, "Delete the video you took on Interstate 80. Now erase the copy you sent to your wife. If you truly love your family, you'll do it." I was stunned and asked what kind of joke this was. The man responded, "You drive a truck," and then named the company I worked for, as well as the names and ages of my family members and other private details I had no idea how they could know. He said it was a personal matter and that he didn't plan on returning to discuss it again. I returned home utterly confused and scared. I immediately told my wife, away from the kids and our family members, what had happened. She was shocked as well, and without hesitation we deleted the video from her phone. The next morning my wife went out to pick up a package from the mail, and when she returned she said there were 2 police patrol cars outside. I was busy inside when she came in, visibly upset, telling me that the police had just spoken with her. I tried to calm her down and asked what the officers had said. She told me, "They said they knew we deleted the video, but for our own good we shouldn't tell anyone about it." Ever since this happened, I've been paranoid. I feel like I'm living in a nightmare, not knowing if they're still watching me or if they might do something to me or my family. I've decided to write this to you, but please keep it anonymous. I just want to make sure this doesn't happen to others. The whole experience has left me with a profound impression of how people in power, people we don't even know, have so much control over us. My name is Oliver, but for safety reasons I won't share my last name. However, I'd love to share my story, which has been one of the most terrifying experiences in my entire career. You see, my father was a truck driver his whole life, and as I grew up, he took me on many of his trips, teaching me how to drive trucks. Over time, I grew fond of the profession and decided to follow in his footsteps. I've been working as a truck driver since I was 18, but when crime began spiraling out of control in the northern part of Mexico, I found myself having to quit. The risks became too great. This story takes place during my last year as a truck driver. I was driving my truck along a highway in the northern part of Tamaulipas, heading toward Nuevo Leon. I had left very early in the morning, around 4 a.m., as I had several deliveries to make that day. But after about half an hour of driving, a group of armored trucks blocked my way and forced me to stop. They were a criminal gang, and through threats, they forced me off my truck and took it. They left me stranded in the middle of the highway in complete darkness. I didn't resist because, as people around here know, the priority is always our physical safety. There was no other option but to get off the truck quietly. After a while, a colleague of mine passed by and offered me a ride since no other vehicle had stopped to help. It was understandable given the situation we were in. My colleague took me back to the city, where I had to explain the situation to the company I worked for. In these cases, there wasn't much they could do. They didn't penalize me or ask me to pay for the lost cargo, but all I cared about was recovering my truck. It was my only tool for work. A few days later, I contacted a friend who worked for the police. I explained my situation and he told me he would help me. He had access to the place where they took the vehicles, buses or cars used by criminals and abandoned afterward. One day I received a call from him telling me that he had found my truck, but it was in terrible condition. I immediately went to retrieve it. I didn't care about anything else. I just wanted to get it back to work since I desperately needed money to support my family. When I arrived at the location where my friend said the truck would be, I couldn't believe it when I opened the door. The smell that came out of it was unbearable. There were bloodstains everywhere, and it was obvious what it had been used for. Despite this, I decided to take it back. I had it cleaned thoroughly, made the necessary repairs, and after a week, it was ready to be used again. A few days later, I went back on the road. My wife wasn't happy that I was going to drive it again. She's very superstitious and insisted that the truck was cursed. She was right. I was driving to San Luis Potosí when at some point the road began to darken. Everything seemed normal, and the highways were relatively quiet, but suddenly I started hearing something coming from the back of the truck. I lowered the volume of the music to listen, and clearly I heard the sounds of crying. I knew there was no one in the truck except for the construction materials I was hauling, but those cries were filled with pain and sorrow, something completely unexplainable. I was getting chills, so I turned the music back up to drown out the sounds. Not wanting to get any more nervous and risk an accident, I started singing loudly and blasting the radio until I reached a gas station, which also had a small 24-hour restaurant. I parked the truck and decided to open the back to check it out and buy a coffee. When I opened the doors, the lights from the gas station illuminated the cargo area, and to my relief, there was no one inside. There wasn't even space for anyone to fit. It was completely filled with construction material. The cries had stopped. I closed the doors and went inside to buy my coffee. While I was drinking it, an older couple came in and asked whose blue truck was parked outside. I told them it was mine and asked what was going on. They came up to me and said they had heard banging from inside the truck, asking if I had someone in there. I told them I didn't know what they were talking about, but they insisted. So I went with them to open the doors and show them the truck was empty. By the time we got to the back of the truck, the banging had stopped. They seemed surprised, so I opened the doors again. The truck was still full of cargo and there was no one inside. I remember the woman hugging her husband because they couldn't understand what was happening, just like I couldn't. They apologized and insisted they had heard banging, as if several people were knocking from inside. I reassured them, but inside I was terrified because I knew exactly what was going on. I left the gas station feeling uneasy. As the night went on, the atmosphere grew more tense. Despite having the music up full blast, there was something that didn't feel right. When I reached my destination in the morning, I unloaded the truck and wanted to sleep a little in the cabin before heading home, but I was too scared to sleep there, so I left early. I only had a few hours of darkness left, and even with the music loud, the fear never went away. After that trip, I never drove that truck again. My wife was right. There were souls trapped inside that truck, souls that had died in a horrible way. I only found out later when I spoke to my friend from the police department. He told me he hadn't shared the details with me at the time, but the truck had been found abandoned in the middle of a forest, with several bodies stacked inside the cargo area. He chose to omit the condition the bodies were in, but now I understood why the truck felt cursed. I immediately got rid of the truck and sold it to a colleague who, despite knowing the history, still wanted to buy it, at a much cheaper price, of course. Eventually, I was able to buy a new truck, but I decided to leave the profession. It was no longer safe. My name is James and I'm Mexican, but I've been living in Canada for over 5 years now, searching for a better quality of life for my family. I had a close friend who was already working here as a truck driver, and he helped me join the same company. I must say that this job is incredibly risky compared to other truck driving jobs around the world. We often have to cross frozen lakes on certain routes, where we must drive at a specific speed and can never stop. If we do, the weight of the truck can break the ice. Even so, I accepted the job because it pays well, given the risks, in addition to the freezing temperatures we endure and the snow-covered forests we have to pass through. At night, the atmosphere is even more imposing. There's thick fog, and hardly any vehicles pass through those roads. Now that you have some context, let me tell you about something truly chilling that happened to me. 2 years ago, I had to transport food to small towns in the northern parts. Since there were few people working that day, I had to make 2 trips. On the second trip, it got dark while I was still on the road. I was already feeling nervous because although I had experience, I rarely worked at night, and it's always a daunting and risky task. The night was freezing, the fog was thick, and everything was blanketed in white. To some, it may seem beautiful, but believe me, when you're out there alone in the dark, all you want is to get out as quickly as possible. I was driving slowly when I saw something that froze me in place. Just a few meters ahead, between the trees, I saw a figure standing. It was humanoid, but it was massive, easily over 3 meters tall. I slowed down, unsure of what I was seeing. I couldn't believe my eyes. Although I couldn't clearly see its face because of the fog, I was certain it wasn't an animal. It had a humanoid shape. I stopped the truck completely because I didn't want to pass by that strange creature. The fear I felt was inexplicable. I had never felt so vulnerable. I wouldn't wish that feeling on anyone, but when I stopped, the truck got stuck. I managed to contact the company, and they said they would send help, but it would take some time due to the weather conditions. I didn't mention anything about what I had seen. I just stayed inside the truck and waited. The creature had disappeared, but that made me even more paranoid. I felt like it could appear from any direction at any moment, knowing that I had seen it. I couldn't do anything but wait until the help arrived. When they finally came, we left immediately. I was frozen from the cold, and on the way back I couldn't stop thinking about that creature or whatever it was. But I didn't say a word to my colleagues. It seemed too fantastical, and I feared they wouldn't believe me and might even make fun of me. So I kept it to myself, telling only my wife. A few days later, I had to drive through those same snowy forests again, but this time I was given another truck. I made sure not to let it get dark while driving through those areas. Even though I was still terrified from what I had seen, I felt a bit safer because my colleague was in front of me in his truck, so I wasn't entirely alone on that foggy road. We were about halfway through when I noticed my colleague started to slow down and eventually stopped, leaving the truck on but not turning it off. I asked him over the radio if something was wrong, and he responded, asking if I hadn't seen something big moving between the trees. He thought it was an animal, but the size was too exaggerated. I hadn't seen anything at that moment, but I knew exactly what he was talking about. I didn't want to worry him, so I told him I hadn't seen anything, but we should keep going. We arrived at the towns, loaded the trucks, and then went for coffee to warm up. That's when he told me, "You're going to think I'm crazy, or that I'm imagining things, but I swear I saw something huge walking between the trees. But when I looked closely, it hid. I couldn't hold back anymore, so I told him what had happened to me that night. He said I should have told him earlier because he would have believed me. There's a legend around those forests that says a giant creature lives there, and it's responsible for many disappearances of locals and even tourists who go to climb those snow-covered mountains. I didn't know about the disappearances that had occurred on those mountains, but I never imagined it could be linked to a creature taking people. It didn't seem logical, nor was it the first thing that came to mind when hearing about those disappearances, but now that I had seen it myself, it made a lot of sense. On the way back, my colleague suddenly slammed on the brakes. My heart started racing, thinking I had seen it again. Then I heard his voice on the radio telling me to get out of my truck quickly, but without turning it off. I saw him get out and walk in front of his truck. It was still daylight, so I felt a bit safer and decided to get out too, though I was terrified. I reached him, and without a word, he pointed to the snow-covered ground where there was a footprint. But this wasn't just any footprint. It looked like a human foot, barefoot, about 1/2 meter long. My colleague didn't hesitate to take pictures of the footprint. I ran back to my truck, shouting at him to get back in. We left the place immediately, and when we got back to the company, my colleague started showing off what we had seen, causing a stir among the employees. Our boss noticed and called us in. He made us explain everything, and my colleague showed him the photo of the footprint, but the boss made him delete it right in front of him, leaving us without any evidence. We didn't understand why he asked us to do that, but he just said that we shouldn't talk about it with anyone, or our job would be at risk. We never spoke of it again within the company. I have no idea why our boss told us that. It was clear he knew something, and didn't want to spread fear among the employees. But he left us with no proof. After some time, I changed jobs to something less dangerous and moved to a different city in Canada. I never returned to that vast frozen forest, but the eerie experience still haunts me. And if you really think about it, it's not so far-fetched that there could be such unknown creatures living in these vast, unexplored forests. In conclusion, we must respect nature. There are many roads out there that should never be traveled as they hold sinister secrets. Many people take shortcuts to get to their destinations faster, but sometimes taking those paths can lead you to a terrifying experience that stays with you for life, just like the trucker in the next video on your screen. Listen to his story and let me know in the comments. Would you take an unexplored shortcut to get there faster? And those were today's stories. Did you like any of them? Comment on which one you liked and tell us if you've ever experienced something like this in your life. Don't forget to like, and I hope to see you in the next video, if you have the courage to watch more stories.